The brick stitch is a fun stitch that looks just like bricks. So what you're going to do is you're going to come up through the back and make maybe a stitch and a half length. I like to have a little bit larger brick stitch lengths, just because it helps give a little bit of a better, not better look, but a more obvious look of brick. And then you're just going to make another, oopsies, almost like you're doing a back stitch. And one more. The number of times I get knots in these videos have been a bit ridiculous. Okay, so this is your first line in the brick stitch. You're now going to continue to go down, and so what we're going to do is this next line is going to be half the stitch length as the one above it. So you're going to come right below, and you're going to go right in the middle. Now you're going to come back up the middle of this stitch, but below it. And go back down. Middle of this one. Nuts, guys. So you're creating a bit of a staggered pattern to help create that brick look. And you're going to do a half stitch for this last one. So now that you have these first two lines, you're essentially going to be repeating this first and second line over and over again. So just continue to use those lines as your guide. So I'm going to come up on my third line. I'm going to see where that first line, where I came down at, and I'm going to do the same thing on this third line. I'm just following the pattern of my first line, making sure I'm bringing these stitches close enough that there's not big gaps between each line. So now I'm on my fourth line, and I'm following the pattern of that second line. So I'm going halfway between each of these stitches above it. And really, once you get in the groove of it, you don't have to be looking at those top two lines. You just kind of look at the line above you and make sure that you're always going either halfway between it or doing a full length. And you'll see the more you do it, the more the brick pattern kind of comes out, because it can kind of be hard to see sometimes, especially as the bottom line gets a little fluffy sometimes. These are very technical words, guys. Fluffy lines. And you're just going to do this all the way until the end of whatever shape you're filling in. Now, I do use the brick stitch sometimes for odd shapes and not just a perfect rectangle. And in that case, you're doing the same concept, it's just you're outlining first the shape. So say it's a circle, you do almost like a brick stitch all around the circle, and then you're going to bring in one line in, you're going to go right in the middle of each stitch. Does that make sense? I hope so. If not, you might want to look up another tutorial. This is one of the harder stitches for me to explain, but I do feel like visually, if I drew it, it would maybe make a little more sense. Okay, I'm going to do one more line for you guys. And you can make smaller stitches. These are pretty big stitches that I started out at the top, but just make sure you know whatever size that stitch length is, the very first one, you're going to be doing half stitches. So if you make that first stitch too small, you're going to have really small half stitches, and it's going to be a lot harder to make it work. So for example, if I did a half stitch of this size, it would be, I mean, that's tiny, and that's going to be a hard thing to keep consistent. So just a word of caution, and maybe why I tend to do a little bit bigger of a brick stitch, because I've